Imagine a city perched on the edge of the Adriatic Sea, its stone walls gleaming under the sun, its streets echoing with the footsteps of merchants, nobles, and spies. This is Dubrovnik, known for centuries as Ragusa. Today, millions of tourists wander its ancient alleys, marveling at its fortifications and Baroque churches. But in the past, behind those walls, a secretive republic thrived, a place that outwitted kingdoms, navigated wars, and survived between the crushing jaws of empires far more powerful than itself. How could such a small, seemingly fragile city-state endure when giants like the Ottoman Empire, Venice, and the Habsburgs dominated the region? The answer lies in cunning diplomacy, ruthless secrecy, and a masterful art of survival that feels more like the plot of a spy thriller than the history of a merchant republic. But let us step back in time, back to the 15th century, when Dubrovnik was at its peak. Picture a thriving port city, its harbors packed with ships carrying salt, silver, spices, silk, and even gunpowder. Ragusa was not large. Its territory stretched only a few miles inland, backed by steep mountains and protected by formidable walls on the coast. Yet, what it lacked in land and armies, it made up for in strategy, intelligence, and money. And this is where the story becomes fascinating. Because Dubrovnik, unlike so many of its neighbors, understood a truth that few grasped at the time. Sometimes, survival doesn't come from strength. It comes from deception. A republic in the shadows. Ragusa was officially a republic. It had a senate, a council of nobles, and an elected rector who ruled for just 1 month, ensuring no man could ever seize too much power. On paper, it looked like a miniature Venice. But in reality, Ragusa functioned more like a secretive intelligence agency disguised as a state. Every major decision, from trade treaties to defense strategies, was cloaked in layers of secrecy. Dubrovnik's leaders wrote down everything in carefully guarded state archives, sealed away from prying eyes. Ambassadors were trained to speak little, reveal less, and always report more. Spies and informants circulated in foreign courts, gathering whispers and secrets that the Republic could use to its advantage. And here's the twist. This wasn't paranoia. This secrecy was survival. Ragusa had no army worth mentioning, no navy that could match Venice, and no resources to resist the Ottomans if they decided to conquer. Instead, the Republic turned itself into a master of disguise, playing empires against each other while appearing loyal to all. One ambassador might bow before the Sultan in Istanbul, offering tributes and gifts, while another would write flattering letters to the Pope in Rome. Ragusa swore loyalty to Christendom, while secretly securing trade rights with Muslim powers. It was a balancing act so dangerous that one mistake could mean annihilation. And yet, for centuries, they succeeded. But why would these empires tolerate such a small republic in their midst? The answer was simple. Dubrovnik was useful, masters of trade. The Republic's lifeblood was commerce. Its ships traveled as far as England and Flanders, carrying Mediterranean goods north and northern goods south. Ragusan merchants acted as middlemen between East and West, trading with the Ottomans while still maintaining ties with Catholic Europe. Even more daring, they often carried goods that others refused to transport. Salt, for instance, was one of Dubrovnik's most profitable commodities, so vital for preserving food that it was nicknamed white gold. Ragusan merchants would carry it through Ottoman lands, across war-torn territories, and into hungry markets. But it wasn't just salt. Dubrovnik became infamous for trading in gunpowder, lead, and even slaves, commodities that were officially restricted but secretly permitted if the profits were high enough. The Republic learned early on that morality could be flexible, but survival was non-negotiable. And here's the genius. By becoming indispensable, Ragusa ensured that neither Venice nor the Ottomans could easily destroy it. To Venice, Ragusa was a useful trading rival that also diverted Ottoman attention. To the Ottomans, it was a small but loyal tributary that provided valuable access to European markets. Destroying it would bring little benefit but lose much. So Ragusa thrived in the cracks of empire, a spider spinning its web between two giants. The price of survival. But let's not romanticize too quickly. Life in Dubrovnik wasn't easy. To maintain its delicate balance, the Republic demanded absolute loyalty from its citizens. Every merchant was expected to place the interests of Ragusa above personal gain. Spies weren't just abroad, they were at home. If you spoke too freely in the taverns, if you revealed too much about diplomatic secrets, you could find yourself imprisoned, fined, or worse. The Rector's Palace, still standing today in Dubrovnik, was not just the seat of government but also a prison. Beneath its elegant halls were cold, damp cells where traitors and criminals awaited their fate. Ragusa might have been small, but its leaders ruled with iron discipline. And then there was the fear. Everyone knew that the city lived under a constant shadow. One wrong alliance, one miscalculation, and the walls of Dubrovnik would crumble under cannon fire. The Republic's survival strategy relied on extreme caution, so much so that historians later described Ragusa as living in permanent disguise. But this raises a question. How long can a state survive by deception? How long can it fool the giants before one of them decides enough is enough? A city of masks. To walk the streets of Dubrovnik in its golden age was to walk in a world of masks. Nobles dressed in Venetian fashion but spoke in a Slavic tongue. Merchants prayed in Catholic churches yet made fortunes trading with Muslims. The Republic banned the ostentatious display of wealth, insisting that nobles dress simply and live modestly, even while their coffers overflowed with gold. This was not hypocrisy, it was policy. Dubrovnik understood that envy could be as deadly as war. If its neighbors believed the city too rich, too powerful, it would become a target. So its leaders cultivated an image of humility, of a republic that was loyal, modest, and unthreatening. While behind the scenes, it quietly grew richer every year. One foreign visitor once wrote, "In Ragusa, wealth hides itself like a thief, and power wears the mask of weakness." It was the perfect summary of the Republic's survival strategy. The earthquake of 1667. But not even cunning diplomacy could shield Dubrovnik from disaster. On the morning of April 6, 1667, the ground beneath the city shook violently. In a matter of minutes, much of Dubrovnik lay in ruins. Churches, palaces, and homes collapsed. Thousands were killed, including many members of the ruling council. Fire swept through the ruins, devouring what the earthquake had spared. For a moment, it seemed the Republic was finished, not by an empire but by nature itself. Yet here again, Dubrovnik showed its resilience. Survivors cleared the rubble, rebuilt the walls, and restored trade routes. The Republic never fully regained its former glory, but it endured. That endurance alone was remarkable, the legacy of a hidden power. Today, as we stand on the walls of Dubrovnik, gazing at the endless Adriatic, it is easy to see only beauty, a picturesque city frozen in time. But if you listen closely, if you imagine the whispers carried by the sea breeze, you can still sense the hidden power that once flowed through these streets. Dubrovnik was more than a city. It was a chess player, moving pieces invisibly on the board of empires. It was a merchant's paradise and a spy's haven. It was proof that sometimes the smallest states can play the biggest games, if they are willing to live in the shadows. And this is only the beginning, because in the next part of our journey, we'll uncover the specific secrets of Ragusa's diplomacy. The treaties, the betrayals, the coded letters that kept it alive. We'll see how Dubrovnik navigated one of the most dangerous centuries in European history and ask, how much of its survival was strategy, and how much was luck? Stay with me, because the Republic of Dubrovnik is about to reveal its most shocking secrets. The Republic of Ragusa, modern-day Dubrovnik, was not a great military power. It had no vast armies, no fleets that could dominate the seas like Venice or Spain. And yet, by the late Middle Ages, it had carved out a place on the map, a place so improbable that it almost seemed like fiction. The key to its survival lay in one word: diplomacy. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Venice was the dominant naval power of the Adriatic. They had the ships, the men, the ports, and the will to control trade. To Venice, Ragusa was nothing more than a small rival, a city with potential but also a threat to its monopoly. The Venetians occupied Dubrovnik for decades, squeezing it for taxes and using it as a pawn in their wars against other Italian states. But the people of Dubrovnik were not content with being pawns. They learned the art of waiting, of enduring occupation while carefully preparing for independence. And when Venice finally loosened its grip in the mid-14th century, Dubrovnik took its chance. The Republic emerged as a sovereign state, ruled by its patrician families, organized into a system that echoed Venice's own but carried its unique touch of pragmatism. Yet freedom brought a new danger. Independence meant exposure. Venice remained a jealous neighbor, and to the east a far greater threat loomed: the Ottoman Empire. By the 15th century, the Ottomans were marching across the Balkans, swallowing Serbia, Bosnia, and much of southeastern Europe. City after city fell. Entire kingdoms vanished. To be a small Christian republic on the Adriatic meant one of two fates: destruction or submission. Dubrovnik chose a third path: calculated survival. Instead of resisting the Ottomans, the Republic paid tribute. It was a clever trick of perception. On paper, Dubrovnik acknowledged the Sultan as overlord, sending envoys to Constantinople each year with gifts and gold. But in practice, the city retained complete autonomy. The Ottomans, satisfied with their tribute, allowed Dubrovnik to manage its own affairs, govern itself, and, most importantly, trade freely across the empire. This dual identity, nominally Ottoman subjects, but fiercely independent in reality, gave Dubrovnik an advantage no other city-state enjoyed. While Venice was constantly at war with the Turks, Raguzan ships sailed safely through Ottoman waters, trading goods from east to west. They became middlemen between Christian Europe and the Muslim world, profiting from both sides while belonging to neither. It was a delicate dance, one that required extraordinary subtlety. Imagine being a Raguzan diplomat in Constantinople. Before the Sultan, you bowed, you humbled yourself, you presented the gifts that symbolized submission. And then, in secret, you corresponded with the kings of Spain, the popes of Rome, and the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. Dubrovnik lived a double life, one face turned toward Islam, the other toward Christianity, and behind both masks, the calculating eyes of survival. But the Republic's survival was not just about diplomacy. It was also about law. Dubrovnik's ruling families created a system of governance that was remarkably modern for its time. The city was ruled by a senate and a rector, an elected figure who held power for just 1 month, living in the rector's palace under strict surveillance. By limiting power, the Republic avoided the rise of tyrants, a fate that had doomed many other small states. They also understood the power of words. Dubrovnik's motto was carved into stone above its gates. Liberty is not to be sold for all the gold in the world. It was both a declaration and a disguise. To outsiders, it signaled defiance. To insiders, it was a reminder that survival required sacrifice, compromise, and endless vigilance. And survival often meant bending morality to necessity. Consider this: while publicly loyal to the Catholic Church, Dubrovnik secretly traded with the Ottomans, even in goods that the Pope himself had forbidden. When European powers imposed embargoes, Dubrovnik often found ways to bypass them, exploiting loopholes, bribing officials, and pretending ignorance when caught. Their strategy was simple: let Venice and the Ottomans bleed each other dry, while the Republic quietly grew rich. But this balancing act came with constant risk. At any moment, Venice might grow tired of Ragusa's success and crush it. At any moment, the Ottomans might demand more than tribute. To live in Dubrovnik during these centuries was to live with the knowledge that survival depended on the razor-thin edge of diplomacy. And yet, despite all odds, the Republic thrived. Its ships sailed as far as England and India. Its merchants traded silver, salt, and spices. Its scholars and poets filled its libraries with knowledge. Dubrovnik became not just a trading hub but a cultural beacon, a place where East and West met in fragile harmony. But there is a darker side to this brilliance. The Republic's survival also depended on secrecy. Its archives, guarded with almost paranoid care, were filled with treaties, secret contracts, and intelligence reports. Dubrovnik became a center of espionage, a place where information was currency more valuable than gold. Ambassadors were not just diplomats. They were spies, trained to gather intelligence in the courts of kings and sultans. Ragusa's leaders understood something vital. In a world ruled by empires, knowledge was the only weapon of the weak. Stories survive of envoys bribing Ottoman officials, of secret letters smuggled through monasteries, of coded reports sent across seas. Dubrovnik's rulers used this intelligence to anticipate wars, to shift allegiances at the right moment, to avoid traps that would have destroyed lesser states. Some might call it cunning, others betrayal. But to Dubrovnik, it was survival. And survival became an obsession, almost a religion. The Republic built walls, massive, impenetrable walls, that encircled the city, rising from the rocks like the ramparts of a dream. They were not just defenses but symbols, a reminder to every citizen that Dubrovnik stood alone, surrounded by powers that could destroy it in a heartbeat. Those walls still stand today, one of the great marvels of medieval engineering. But to the people who built them, they were not monuments, they were lifelines. Every stone was a promise. We will not fall, we will not vanish, we will endure. Yet endurance came at a cost. For centuries, Dubrovnik lived in the shadows of empires, never fully free, never fully enslaved, always in between. It was a republic of masks, where every handshake concealed a calculation, every treaty concealed a loophole, and every alliance was temporary. And still, the gamble worked. By the 16th century, when much of the Balkans lay crushed under Ottoman rule and Venice fought desperately to maintain its fading empire, Dubrovnik remained intact, small, fragile, but astonishingly wealthy. The city's flag, with its red field and the image of St. Blaise, still flew proudly above its towers. Its merchants still counted their profits. The Senate still debated in secret chambers. It was, in every sense, a miracle of survival. But miracles are never permanent. And as the centuries turned, new storms gathered. Storms that no diplomacy, no walls, no secrets could entirely withstand. The Republic had outsmarted Venice. It had outlasted the Ottomans. But soon it would face forces that no state, no matter how cunning, could escape. The age of empires, the rise of new powers, and the brutal logic of modern war. The question that haunted Dubrovnik was simple. How long can a small state fool the world before the world decides to crush it? The answer would come, but not yet. For now, the Republic continued its dance of survival, its game of deception, its endless balancing act between East and West. And in doing so, it created one of the most extraordinary stories of endurance in human history. A story that was both inspiring and unsettling, both admirable and deeply cynical. Because in Dubrovnik's survival, we see a mirror of our own time. How often do small nations today navigate between great powers, sacrificing principle for survival, bending morality for necessity? The Republic of Ragusa was not just a medieval curiosity. It was a warning, a lesson carved in stone and sealed in archives. And that lesson was this: survival is never free. It is bought with silence, with compromise, with secrets whispered in the shadows of empires. Dubrovnik's survival strategy was not only based on diplomacy. It was built upon a system of cunning manipulation, secret intelligence, and relentless pragmatism. Unlike larger kingdoms that clung to notions of honor or prestige, the Republic of Ragusa understood something deeper. Survival was not about winning wars, but about never fighting them in the first place. And to achieve this, Dubrovnik became a master at deception, secrecy, and subtle exploitation of imperial rivalries. One of their most powerful tools was espionage. While the great powers fought bloody wars, Dubrovnik maintained an intelligence network stretching from Istanbul to Venice, from Rome to Madrid. Merchants doubled as informants. Captains carried coded messages hidden in the folds of their sails. Diplomats whispered secrets in the corridors of Europe's courts. This flow of information allowed Dubrovnik to anticipate the rise of new threats and adjust its policies before anyone could act against it. But espionage was only one layer. The Republic had another weapon, perhaps even more potent: wealth management through illusion. Dubrovnik was not as rich as Venice, nor as militarily strong as the Ottomans, nor as culturally influential as Spain. Yet it carefully crafted the perception of being indispensable. To Venice, they acted as loyal trading partners. To the Ottomans, they paid tribute, making themselves appear weak and harmless. To Spain and France, they emphasized their role as neutral intermediaries, brokers of goods and information. In essence, Dubrovnik made itself appear too useful to destroy, yet too insignificant to conquer. That balancing act was extraordinary. Few states in history ever managed it so flawlessly. Consider their unique position. Officially, Ragusa was a tributary state of the Ottoman Empire. Every year, an ambassador traveled to Istanbul carrying gold, gifts, and tokens of loyalty to the Sultan. On paper, Dubrovnik was submissive, even humble. Yet behind closed doors, its merchants traded freely with Christian Europe, often smuggling goods that were technically forbidden under Ottoman law. And the Ottomans tolerated this because Dubrovnik also brought them intelligence, naval supplies, and access to markets they couldn't control themselves. But here lies the paradox. At the very same time, Ragusa was also cultivating deep ties with the papacy and the Catholic monarchies of Europe. When the Ottoman threat seemed overwhelming, Dubrovnik emphasized its Christian identity. When European empires pressed too hard, it highlighted its loyalty to the Sultan. This chameleon-like diplomacy was not cowardice, it was survival engineering. Their motto reflected this philosophy: libertas, freedom. But it was not freedom in the sense of romantic independence. It was freedom through compromise, calculation, and clever deception. This dual allegiance, however, created immense internal pressure. The ruling aristocracy of Dubrovnik, wealthy merchant families who controlled the Great Council, were constantly forced to make impossible decisions. Which empire to flatter? Which enemy to deceive? Which secret to keep hidden? Their very survival depended on choosing correctly every single time. And sometimes their cleverness bordered on the unbelievable. For instance, when both the Venetians and Ottomans demanded naval assistance during their wars, Dubrovnik sent symbolic aid, small, token fleets that looked impressive on paper but were strategically irrelevant. Each side believed Ragusa was helping them, yet in truth, Dubrovnik gave away almost nothing. Another striking example comes from their handling of disease. During outbreaks of plague, Dubrovnik became one of the first states in history to enforce strict quarantine laws, not just to protect its people, but to control the flow of trade. By closing and opening its ports selectively, Dubrovnik could manipulate which empire received goods and when, turning survival into a bargaining chip. But beneath these brilliant maneuvers, danger was never far away. One wrong decision could mean annihilation. A careless ambassador could trigger war. A greedy merchant could spark retaliation. Dubrovnik's survival was like walking a tightrope over a bottomless abyss, every step precise, every move calculated. The Republic's greatest fear was always the same: that one day, the Ottomans and Europeans might stop fighting each other and turn their eyes toward Dubrovnik itself. For centuries, that day never came, precisely because Dubrovnik ensured it never would. By feeding both sides information, resources, and illusions, the city made itself invisible in plain sight. Yet, the psychological toll on its leaders was immense. Imagine living in a world where every letter you send, every alliance you form, every tribute you pay could determine whether your city flourishes or is wiped off the map. The people of Dubrovnik were not warriors on the battlefield, but they fought a war of survival every single day, through words, secrets, and strategies sharper than any sword. And still, the Republic endured. While mighty powers like Venice saw their influence wane, Dubrovnik, small, fragile, and hidden, remained standing, guarding its independence behind high walls and higher intelligence. But here's the question we must ask. Was Dubrovnik truly free? Or was it enslaved to the constant fear of annihilation? Was libertas a genuine reality, or merely a carefully sustained illusion? The answer lies not just in its politics, but in the stories of the men and women who lived inside those walls. Aristocrats balancing loyalties, merchants risking their lives at sea, spies gathering whispers in imperial palaces, and ordinary citizens who never knew how close their world came to destruction. As the 16th and 17th centuries unfolded, Dubrovnik's fragile balancing act would be tested again and again, through earthquakes, wars, and betrayals. And yet, the small republic continued to deceive, to maneuver, to outwit giants. But nothing lasts forever. And while Dubrovnik had mastered the art of survival, its greatest challenges were yet to come. On the morning of April 6, 1667, Dubrovnik woke to a day that would change its destiny forever. For centuries, the city had stood as the silent trickster of the Adriatic, a small, glittering republic that fooled empires, turned enemies into protectors, and survived through sheer wit. But on that day, it wasn't politics, diplomacy, or war that threatened its survival. It was the earth itself. At 8 a.m., the ground beneath Dubrovnik shook with apocalyptic force. Stone buildings groaned, then collapsed in an instant. The majestic rector's palace cracked and crumbled. Churches, libraries, and homes turned to dust. In less than a minute, thousands were crushed beneath falling rubble. Fires, sparked from shattered kitchens and overturned oil lamps, swept through the ruins, consuming what little remained standing. The survivors stumbled through smoke and flame, dazed, terrified, clutching at one another in streets now choked with ash. Mothers screamed for children they could no longer find. Nobles, once untouchable in their marble palaces, now bled in the same dirt as peasants. The city that had once been a jewel of trade and deception now resembled hell itself. But even worse than the physical destruction was the political danger that followed. For centuries, Dubrovnik's strength had come from appearances. To the outside world, it had projected stability, wealth, and balance. Now, with its population shattered and its noble class nearly wiped out, the Republic faced its most perilous truth. If word of its weakness spread, empires would descend like vultures. And so, amid the rubble, Dubrovnik's survival instinct awoke once again. Within days, surviving nobles and clerics organized themselves, declaring to foreign envoys that the Republic was strong, that rebuilding was already underway, and that Dubrovnik would endure as it always had. Messages were sent to Istanbul, Vienna, and Rome, carefully crafted to conceal the depth of the devastation. The Ottomans were assured of Dubrovnik's loyalty. Catholic monarchs were reminded of its faith. Trade partners were promised safe passage. It was a bluff, a lie, but it was a lie told with conviction. Behind the diplomatic curtain, the truth was grim. Famine stalked the survivors, plague crept through makeshift shelters, and power struggles erupted among the shattered nobility. Yet outside eyes never saw this. To the world, Dubrovnik remained unbroken. This moment revealed the Republic's true genius. Even when brought to its knees, it understood that survival was not about strength but about illusion. If empires believed Dubrovnik was strong, then Dubrovnik was strong. But the earthquake had lasting consequences. It destroyed not just buildings, but also the foundations of Dubrovnik's aristocracy. Entire noble families were wiped out. Those who remained fought bitterly over power, forming rival factions that weakened the once united ruling council. The careful unity that had safeguarded Dubrovnik for centuries began to fracture. Still, the Republic leaned on its oldest weapon, deception. Venice, always lurking as a predator, was reminded of Dubrovnik's friendship with the Ottomans. The Ottomans, growing suspicious of the city's loyalty, were reassured with gifts, tributes, and flattering words. Meanwhile, Dubrovnik whispered secrets to Habsburg Austria, presenting itself as a neutral observer with valuable intelligence. Each empire believed Dubrovnik was its loyal servant. None realized the Republic served only itself. And yet, the tightrope walk grew more dangerous with every passing year. The 17th and 18th centuries were an age of transformation. Nation-states were rising. Armies grew larger, centralized, and professional. The balance of power game that Dubrovnik had mastered was becoming obsolete. The Republic was no longer indispensable. Its once unique role as a neutral middleman between East and West now seemed less valuable to powers that could impose their will directly. But Dubrovnik did not surrender. Instead, it found new ways to outweed history. One such method was its shadowy relationship with Adriatic pirates. While Venice spent vast resources patrolling the seas and clashing with raiders, Dubrovnik chose a different path. Instead of fighting pirates, it negotiated with them. At times, it paid them off. At other times, it discreetly redirected them toward Venetian or Ottoman shipping. This policy ensured Dubrovnik's merchants sailed safely, while its rivals bore the losses. What seemed like cowardice was, in fact, survival strategy, a reminder that the Republic always fought wars with coin and words, not swords. Equally cunning was Dubrovnik's handling of religion. Its Catholic devotion was carefully displayed to Rome and European monarchs, who praised the city as a bastion of Christianity on the edge of Islam. Pilgrims continued to visit Dubrovnik's holy sites, unaware that at the very same time, the Republic supplied the Ottoman fleet with timber for its warships. It was the old Dubrovnik trick: show one face to the west, another to the east, and keep the truth hidden in the shadows. But cracks widened further as the century turned. The earthquake had left scars not just in stone but in memory. Nobles accused one another of betraying the Republic. Some argued for leaning more heavily on Austria, whose growing power threatened to dominate the Adriatic. Others insisted loyalty to the Ottomans was the only safe path. The once unified aristocracy split into bitter camps. At the same time, Europe itself was shifting violently. The wars of succession, the rise of Prussia, the expanding reach of Russia, all reshaped the continent's balance of power. For a city that survived by predicting imperial rivalries, the New World was dangerous. The game was faster, harsher, less forgiving. Yet Dubrovnik endured. When the War of the Spanish Succession tore Europe apart, Dubrovnik stayed neutral, trading with all sides, quietly profiting while others bled. When Austrian ambitions grew, the Republic flattered Vienna while reminding Istanbul of its loyalty. When French ships appeared in the Adriatic, Dubrovnik welcomed them with feasts, careful not to offend their Ottoman overlords. Always smiling, always promising, always deceiving. By the 18th century, however, a shadow loomed larger than any before: the Habsburgs of Austria. Unlike Venice, which had played the Adriatic game for centuries, Austria thought in terms of empire and dominion. To Vienna, Dubrovnik was not a partner but a morsel, ripe for absorption. And yet, Dubrovnik still managed to survive by flattering the Habsburgs even as it swore loyalty to the Ottomans. But everyone sensed the game was nearing its end. The age of tiny, independent republics was vanishing. Genoa, Pisa, Ragusa all were either collapsing or being absorbed by larger states. The mask of invincibility that Dubrovnik had worn for centuries was slipping. And still, the Republic endured. Its ships carried goods across the Adriatic. Its diplomats whispered in the halls of Europe. Its bells rang each morning across rebuilt streets that masked the scars of 1667. But deep down, even Dubrovnik's cleverest minds knew the truth. A storm was coming that no trick, no tribute, no bluff could withstand. That storm had a name: Napoleon Bonaparte. Unlike the Ottomans, who respected Dubrovnik's loyalty, or Venice, which begrudgingly tolerated its independence, Napoleon was something new. He represented the modern age, the age of conquest, nationalism, and unstoppable armies. He did not play games. He did not respect old illusions. For centuries, Dubrovnik had fooled the world. But what happens when the world no longer wishes to be fooled? What happens when an empire arises that tears away masks and demands obedience, not deception? The answer was coming, and with it, the final chapter of Dubrovnik's astonishing survival story. The fall of Dubrovnik's independence was not a sudden collapse, but rather a gradual unraveling. For centuries, the city-state had maneuvered between giants: Ottoman, Venetian, Habsburg, French. Yet by the 19th century, the balance of power had shifted too dramatically. Napoleon's armies swept through the Adriatic in 1806, and by 1808, the Republic of Ragusa, after nearly 500 years of independence, ceased to exist. For the first time since the Middle Ages, the world's mapmakers no longer needed to carve out this sliver of sovereignty along the Adriatic coast. And yet, even in defeat, Dubrovnik's story lived on. An enduring lesson about how intelligence, diplomacy, and sheer cunning can rival brute force. Imagine standing on the city walls today, looking out at the same waters that Venetian galleys once dominated and Ottoman fleets once patrolled. The limestone walls, so perfectly preserved, echo centuries of whispered negotiations, coded letters, and desperate bargains struck in candlelit council chambers. The Republic of Dubrovnik may have vanished on paper, but its legacy continued in ways that still resonate far beyond the Adriatic. One of the most fascinating aspects of this legacy lies in how Dubrovnik has been remembered. To the Ottomans, it was a useful but minor pawn, loyal so long as tribute was paid. To the Venetians, it was an irritating rival, one that somehow managed to survive despite being vastly weaker. To the Habsburgs, it was a curiosity, an independent sliver of land that had no right, in their eyes, to exist. And yet, for the people of Dubrovnik themselves, their republic was a source of immense pride, proof that intellect and wit could achieve what armies often could not. But what was the true secret of Dubrovnik's endurance? The answer lies in their culture of diplomacy as much as in their strategic location. Unlike other small states of the time, Dubrovnik cultivated a core of professional diplomats, men who spoke multiple languages, who had lived abroad for years, and who understood the subtleties of court etiquette in Vienna, Constantinople, or Paris. These envoys were trained not only in politics but in the art of survival. They could bend, flatter, deceive, and persuade, often in the same conversation. Their archives, thousands of letters preserved in Dubrovnik to this day, reveal a state obsessed with information. Spies and informants reported on troop movements, trade negotiations, and royal marriages. Dubrovnik's leaders always seemed to know a little more than their size should have allowed. And in an age where information often meant the difference between conquest and survival, knowledge was Dubrovnik's greatest weapon. But this strategy had a cost. Maintaining independence required sacrifices that often went unnoticed in the romantic retelling of Dubrovnik's history. The Republic could not afford to wage war, which meant it often stood aside while neighboring lands were invaded, burned, or enslaved. Its tribute to the Ottomans was resented by some as dishonorable, while others viewed it as a necessary price for survival. And its neutrality, so vital for trade, sometimes looked like cowardice to those caught in the fires of greater conflicts. There were also darker shadows. Dubrovnik's prosperity was built on trade routes that intersected with the grim realities of slavery. Enslaved people from the Balkans and beyond passed through its ports, their labor enriching the city even as its leaders prided themselves on diplomacy and culture. The Republic's reputation as a beacon of civility and intelligence was, like many historical powers, stained with contradictions. And yet, these contradictions only make Dubrovnik more human, more real. For it was not a utopia, but a fragile experiment in survival, one that somehow lasted far longer than anyone would have predicted. The end of the Republic in 1808 came almost without resistance. Facing Napoleon's overwhelming power, Dubrovnik's leaders simply acknowledged reality. Their centuries-long balancing act had been undone not by failure, but by a new world order in which small states had little place. The age of empires had truly arrived, and there was no room for a secret republic that thrived on ambiguity and negotiation. But the echoes of Dubrovnik's strategies lived on. Historians and diplomats alike studied its methods, admiring how a city of fewer than 50,000 inhabitants managed to manipulate empires with populations in the tens of millions. To this day, Dubrovnik is cited as one of the most brilliant examples of small state diplomacy in history, a case study in how wit, intelligence, and resilience can stand against brute strength. And perhaps that is why the story of Dubrovnik resonates so deeply even now. In a world still dominated by great powers, the idea that a small state, or even a small community, can survive and thrive through cunning, information, and diplomacy feels both timeless and inspiring. So what lessons does Dubrovnik offer us today? First, that survival is not always about strength. It is about adaptability, knowing when to fight, when to yield, and when to disappear into the background. Second, that knowledge is power. Dubrovnik's obsession with information allowed it to anticipate threats and exploit opportunities long before its rivals realized what was happening. And third, that diplomacy, when practiced with skill and patience, can achieve what armies often cannot. Standing in the old city of Dubrovnik today, surrounded by tourists and sunlight, it is hard to imagine that these same streets once pulsed with the fear of invasion, the weight of secret negotiations, and the constant awareness that survival depended on choices made behind closed doors. Yet if you listen closely, beyond the noise of the present, you can almost hear it, the quiet heartbeat of a republic that defied empires for centuries. The Republic of Dubrovnik may have been small, fragile, and often forgotten, but in the annals of history, it stands as one of the greatest reminders that intelligence, strategy, and willpower can outshine even the mightiest of armies. And perhaps, in our own age of uncertainty, that is a truth we need more than ever.